There's the old cliche of poor Beryl who was on trial in Russia, and the KGB judge asked him, Beryl, if you had a skyscraper, what would you do with it? And Beryl answered without hesitation, I would give it away to Mother Russia. And the judge asked him, Beryl, if you had an ocean liner, what would you do with it? And he quickly answered, I would give my ocean liner away to Mother Russia without thinking. And finally the judge asked him, Beryl, if you had a sweater, what would you do with it? And Beryl suddenly became very red and uncomfortable, and he hesitated. And the judge said to him, Beryl, I don't understand you. And the skyscraper you give away without thinking. The ocean liner you give away without hesitating. And when it comes to the sweater, you can't get it out of your mouth if you give it away to Mother Russia? And Beryl said, but Your Honor, you don't understand. I own a sweater. And this is an extremely important yesod in life. Mesiras nefesh on the imaginative front, on the fantasy front, is very glorious. But on the real world, when it comes to reality, it's a whole different parasha. It's easy to give away skyscrapers that you don't have. It's much harder to give away a sweater that you own. Understanding this yesod to a great degree can be the key to understanding our parasha. In our parasha, we learn about two women. One is for all practical purposes cursed, and the other is considered the greatest of tzedekos. One becomes the symbol of chait and deceit, and the other becomes the mother of eventually Melech HaMashiach. Yet if we are to stop and think for a moment, the question has to be addressed, what is the difference between the actions of these two women? You have Eishav Patifa, who tried to entice Yosef, and you had Tamar, who did the same for Yehuda. One is a Marshas, the other is a Tzedekis. Of course, the obvious answer is, one did it L'Shem Shemayim and the other didn't. But wait, let's take a closer look. Eishav Patifa didn't do it L'Shem Shemayim. Chazal tell us, she went and she told Yosef that her astrologers told her, her stargazers told her that it was Min HaShemayim, that they too would produce doros. They would produce generations. She was destined to be one of the mothers of Klal Yisrael. Ultimately, Yosef would marry Osnath, who was Dinah's daughter, but raised by Potiphar. And if someone raises another child, it's Ki'ilu Yalda. So therefore, that was the meaning of what she had seen, or what others had seen and conveyed to her. The doros that would come from Yosef, Menashe, and Ephraim would not come directly from her, it would come from her adopted daughter. But let's assume, for argument's sake, that she was unaware of this. The things that the stargazer saw didn't always come with the necessary commentaries. The printout that she was given from her stargazer stated that somehow generations would come from her and Yosef. And she decided to take the initiative, hoping somehow to entice Yosef. Then you have Tamar, who knows and understands that Malchus Beis David has to come from her, and for all practical purposes, she does the same with Yehuda. Yet Tamar is considered someone who did a noble act with Mesiras Nefesh for the sake of Klal Yisrael, as opposed to Eishav Potifera. We take her act at face value for what it was. And the answer is, but it's not really a question. The Gemara tells us in Masechtas Brachos that when Reb Zera cut the Lechem Mishnah on Shabbos, he cut both chalas, according to one shot. According to another shot, he cut the greater portion of the challah for himself. And they said to him, but doesn't it look like it lacks manners to cut yourself such a huge piece of challah, or to start cutting up all the challahs that are in front of you? And so he explained to them, being that I don't act this way the entire week, and I only do so on Shabbos, no one will misinterpret my act as an act of gluttony. They will understand that it is the Kedusha of Shabbos, the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos that shines forth over here. The mitzvah of Einik Shabbos that makes the rich richer, the smart smarter, the holy one holier. If I acted this way the entire week, then to try to excuse myself on Shabbos and say it was the mitzvah of Einik Shabbos, that wouldn't work. So this is the Yisod. The entire week, we know how Rebbe Zera ate. Suddenly on Shabbos, there's a whole different attitude. The Kedusha of Shabbos shines forth. But if the entire week he eats this way, so it's hard to make the point on Shabbos. Tamar lived a life of tznius. So much so that that's why Yehuda didn't recognize her. When she was his daughter, he hardly ever saw her. Eishes Potiphera lived a whole different kind of a life. So if during the week you eat without manners, then you can't argue on Shabbos that it's the covet of Shabbos that is shining forth over here. Tamar's whole life personified tznius. And even this one act was done in the most tzniustic of ways. But she saw over here the necessity. She saw over here the chain of Mashiach has to be started. She understood the other inyanim of Malchus Beis David, that the Satan will vest all of his kaiches in trying to stop it, and therefore it has to be done in the strangest of ways, so that the Satan will not chap that here lies the Yeshua of Klal Yisrael. That explains Lot and his daughters, Tamar and Yehuda, David and Bathsheba. Like the famous Mashal Chazal say, if you want to send a diamond through a dangerous neighborhood, to put it into a beautiful box and wrap a gorgeous ribbon around it is not going to ensure its safety. On the contrary, it's going to guarantee its theft. The smart person will take it and throw it into a dirty bag with dirty clothes, and then he has a hope of, at least he stands a chance, is going to make it out of the bad neighborhood and put the diamond into its proper casing when it's in a secure environment. So Malchus Beis David, in order to avoid the kitrugim of the Satan, always has to come to the strangest of ways. And Tamar, who lives her whole life as a great tzedekis and continues to live her life afterwards as a great tzedekis, engages in this one act, which appears less than honorable for the sake of Klal Yisrael. Eishes Potiphera, on the other hand, cannot justify the rest of her life to the extent where she can say, well, this was different. This was L'Shem Shemayim. I wanted Shevet Menashe and Ephraim to come from me because she would have to make the case that this was different. It wasn't different. But let's get back now to Beryl's sweater. The Yerucham Demir Mishgiach is a very famous part over here, which is an extremely crucial yesod in life. If you want to join the list of people that claim that they're doing things L'Shem Shemayim, you have to get on a very long line. Everyone thinks that what they're doing is L'Shem Shemayim. People throw rocks L'Shem Shemayim, people smash windows L'Shem Shemayim. People engage in all kinds of averas, L'Shem Shemayim, rationalizing why ultimately this is the right thing to do at that given time. And you know something? Every once in a while, one of these things has to be done L'Shem Shemayim. But what's the test? The test is, if you're willing to do something for your own benefit L'Shem Shemayim, will you be equally as quick to do something against your pleasure that goes against what you really want for that same L'Shem Shemayim? If you're willing to throw yourself into an Aveira L'Shem Shemayim, are you just as quick to throw yourself into a fire L'Shem Shemayim? If you are, then you have justified your claim. If not, then you know this is just an excuse. The way to know that someone is doing something L'Shem Shemayim is not to listen to what he's saying, but watch what he does when things are not going his way. And both for Eishes Potiphera and for Tamar, there was a point here where things were not going their way. She tried to entice Yosef. She claims she does L'Shem Shemayim. But things are not working out. In her frustration and her anger, what does she do? She points the finger at Yosef and she has him tossed into prison. She loses herself, she goes into a mad fury, and she cries foul play, and she attempts to destroy Yosef's life. When things did not work out for Tamar, when it looked like she was going to be tossed into a fiery furnace, she made a quick assessment of the situation. And her analysis was, Under these circumstances, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Motivit is better for a person to be thrown into a fiery furnace as opposed to being veyashev chavere berabim. What about Mashiach and Malchus Beis David? So she says, look, Rebbeinu Shalom, I tried doing one thing, L'Shem Shamayim. If you put me in this situation where I have this fiery furnace in front of me, and my only alternative is to be veyashev chavere berabim, I now have an opportunity to employ a different halacha L'Shem Shamayim. The halacha of, again, motivit is better that a person throw himself into a fiery furnace than embarrassing someone berabim. And Tamar was just as ready over here to fulfill the halacha of the fiery furnace as she was fulfilling her other quest of being the Mekayim chain of Mashiach. This indicates to us that Tamar really meant it L'Shem Shamayim. Sure. Now, of course, to Yosef HaTzadik, she constantly brought up this L'Shem Shamayim aspect of it. You must do it to build Ephraim and Menashe. Look, the stargazers say that the Shvatim are going to come from us. My father used to tell me a verse from the Esh to Belzerav. Yosef struggled with this question. And he said, a lot of things make sense, but somehow you don't see the Shem Havai on it. You don't feel this is the Ratzon Hashem. Ish sometimes refers to the Rebbeinu Shalom's name, Hashem Ish Muhammad. Yosef saw the Ein Ish. It makes sense, you have to be on the Shvatim, but he just didn't have the feeling that the Rebbeinu Shalom really wants him to do this. And therefore, his response was, Vayonas v'yetzeh chutza. He just ran. When you feel the Yetzer Hara trying to convince you to do an Aveira, and suddenly he comes up with a dray and says, but it's L'Shem Shamayim, it's a mitzvah if you do it. Yosef said, I'm not going to start arguing with this Yetzer Hara. This is dangerous. Vayonas. He ran from it, as if to say L'Shem Shamayim, Ahin L'Shem Shamayim Aher. Absolutely not. I am not even entertaining the idea. I'm not going to engage this whole conversation. I'm not going to weigh the pros and cons of it. Yosef HaTzadik's Nisayon was immense. Of course, it paved the way for the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael and Mitzrayim. Eshes Potiphar appeared to Yosef for an entire year, trying to entice him day in, day out. And for 365 days, she never appeared to Yosef twice with the same wardrobe. Chazal say the begadim she wore in the morning, she never wore in the evening. The Chedush Yirim explains what all of this means is, Yosef HaTzadik, all alone, in Mitzrayim, faced this test, faced this Nisayon every single day of the year, under a consistently changing situation. Because whatever Yosef HaTzadik did broke forth a whole new derech for Klal Yisrael. It made it much easier for Klal Yisrael to be mercenaries themselves towards Tznius. They could ride in the path that was already dug out for Yosef HaTzadik. And therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to put Yosef HaTzadik in a situation where he was constantly faced with a new Nisayon every single day of the year in order to pave this path for every Yid during every single day of the year, regardless of what his particular set of Nisyonis are. Another analogy here between the two stories of Yosef HaTzadik and how Malchus Beis David starts is explained by Reb Tzadok HaKohen. Reb Tzadok says both Yosef and Malchus Beis David plays an important role for, again, creating an atmosphere for Klal Yisrael to endure challenges and to be able to rise even from the ashes of defeat. Yosef HaTzadik paves the way for a Yid not to be nichshel in chet. You have the power to say no. You have the power to decipher L'Shem Shamayim from a guise of L'Shem Shamayim. Yosef HaTzadik did it. And even if Chas v'Shalom, a Yid is nichshel in chet, David HaMelech, through his tshuva on Be'er-Sheva, and the whole Indian of Malchus Beis David, and all of the different strange situations of how the chain of Beis David was continued, teaches us that regardless of how low a person seems to have fallen, he has to start back up right again. There's never an excuse of saying, I blew it, I was over the worst of errors, what's the point? I may as well give up. Chaf ulahaskir. Chazal tell us, Lo hayaroi David liyasei ma'isa, elo lahayis tshuva libanav. David HaMelech, And the concept of Malchus based David going through these difficult crossroads is only a stoop down of Malchus to the lowest curb in order to scoop up any yid that wants to come back, that wants to come up with it. Shem Shmuel brings that someone once came to the Kotzker Rebbe and he said over a verse, I forget if it was from the Yehuda Kodesh or the Rebbe Rabbanan, that the reason Yehuda, after he was sort of demoted by his brothers, following Mechiras Yosef, because the brothers were upset at him, realizing how much pain this has caused their father, why did he not stop them? So Yehuda left his brothers, and the first thing he did was, he looked to get married and have children. Why? So the Rebbe Rabbanim said that Yehuda felt, look, his brothers demoted him, he lost his chance, at least let him have children, that'll get it straight. That when the Kotzker heard this, he was very upset. He said, it's impossible that Rebbe Rabbanim should say such a word. No person can give up on himself. The Shem Shmuel, however, suggests that maybe this person didn't quite understand what the Rebbe Rabbanim meant. He didn't mean to say that Yehuda gave up on himself, and therefore he said, okay, I don't have a life anymore, at least let me start and hope that my children will be able to make something out of themselves. Chas v'shalom. Yehuda would never think that way. Rather, he meant to say as follows. Mechiras Yosef was a terrible mistake. Whatever that mistake means, we don't truly understand. But Yehuda, being that he was the person in power, as always, was the one who had to accept responsibility, and he accepted responsibility. Haridu achav midu lasai. His brothers demoted him temporarily from his prestigious position as Melech. So what did Yehuda do? He said, I lost it. I made a terrible mistake. I'm going to start again. And how does a person start again? With the first mitzvah in the Torah. What's the first mitzvah in the Torah? The mitzvah of Prudavu, having children. Not that Yehuda said, I'm giving up on myself, and maybe something will come of my children. But just the opposite. Yehuda says, I made a terrible mistake. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to go back to square one. I'm going to start with the mitzvah of Prudavu, the first mitzvah of the Torah. I'm going to work myself back up to my Madreg. And this is precisely the prelude to Malchus Beis David, to the birth of Mashiach, to the stories that will follow. Because that is Malchus Beis David. That personifies Malchus Beis David. L'hoyles tshuva l'banav. There is no such a thing as a yid falling too low to the point where he can't turn around and come back up. Chazal tell us what gave Yosef the final push to be able to run away. He saw the image of his father in the window. Now the question has to be asked, is the Gemara suggesting that had Yosef not suddenly seen the image of his father in the window, then he would have given in to his Yetzer Hara? Does the Gemara not tell us that anyone who will claim, look, what was I supposed to do? I was overwhelmed with taiva in an environment that didn't support me, and therefore I was nichshol and chatayim, he's going to have a hard time because the Rebbeinu Shalom is going to say to him, what about Yosef HaTzadik? Can anyone be more vulnerable than a 17-year-old alone in Mitzrayim, facing up to this Messiah day in, day out for an entire year? But if indeed Yosef had this added celestial help, if min hashamayim suddenly his father's image appeared in the window, well, then why can't this person answer, but my father didn't appear to me in the window? So why indeed, asks the Sefer Ber Moshe from the Yerush Rebbe Chaim Levracha, why indeed should the Gemara say Yosef Mechayiv es Rashoyim, that Yosef takes away the excuse from all the wicked people? Chazal make it very clear. Yosef HaTzadik had this tremendous Mesilas Nefesh. The Medrash says Yosef Goder Atzmoi Meha Erva. The Nigdiru Kol Yisrael B'Schusin. As a result, all of Klal Yisrael was able to follow along behind the gate that Yosef HaTzadik built. And they were able to clearly separate themselves from Taiva in Mitzrayim, in a land of Taiva. But if indeed Yosef HaTzadik came so close to Chas v'Shalom stumbling in, and it was only the sudden appearance of his father that stopped him from being chayte, so how could Yosef Atzadik's abstaining from sin has such a powerful impact that indeed it paves the way for generations and generations afterwards, for all of Klal Yisrael. Therefore, explains the Be'er Moshe, one must understand that the Nisayon of Yosef Atzadik was not kipshutai. The taiva, the Yetzer Hara, that faced Yosef Atzadik was not the normal Yetzer Hara. It was tenfold, 1,000-fold more, which often is the case when it comes to tzaddikim. Tzaddikim face nisyonos that are l'mayla of their koiches. If in regard to the general public, the Yetzer Hara is considered a masata, someone who attempts to appease him or to win him over to sin. In regard to tzaddikim, the Yetzer Hara appears in the form of a sar shalish. And Yosef Atzadik felt that he had nowhere to turn. Yosef Atzadik felt this Yetzer Hara was not a normal Yetzer Hara. He was now flesh against the fire. And therefore it is Yosef Atzadik himself who sort of dug his heels in deeper, who reached up to the schus of his avos, and he called upon the schus avos to help him, saying, Rabbeinu Shalom, I am faced with an assignment that appears to be beyond what I can deal with, and therefore I am asking for air support. I'm asking for the siyata d'shmaya to overcome. The Gemara tells us a story about Rav Amram Chasida. Rav Amram Chasida, and in order to get the term Chassid, the pious one, in the Gemara, one must earn that term. So Rav Amram Chasida was no simple person. The great Rav Amram rescued a bunch of girls from captivity. And overnight they were in his attic. In the middle of the night, the Gemara says, in the Sechtes Kiddushin, that he took a ladder to go up to them. How heavy was this ladder? Under normal circumstances, 10 people could have not carried this ladder. But the Yetzer Hara was driving him so hard that he was able to pick it up and to place it against the attic so that he can ascend. Halfway up the ladder, he stopped and he began to yell, fire, fire! And the entire town came running with their buckets. But they saw no physical fire, and it became very obvious what Rav Amram Chasida meant when he said fire. And out of Rav Amram Chasida, tells us the Gemara, the Yetzer Hara exited, and it became tangible. It was visible to the people. In terms of the people understanding what type of an assignment Rav Amram Chasida faced, it looked like a huge fire that left him. And Rav Amram Chasida said to the Yetzer Hara, Chazi, da'at noira, you're fire, v'ano b'isrin, I'm flesh. And yet v'ano adifna minach, I found a way to outsmart you. And his Talmidim said to him, Rebbe, this is sort of embarrassing. And Rav Amram Chasida said, better to be embarrassed your entire life down here than to be a Rosh Hasha'achas l'fnei hamakam. And afterwards, Rav Amram Chasida, as great as a tzaddik as he was beforehand, but there was a visible light that was seen about him, a certain aura, a certain kiddusha, that was obvious even to someone who was not a Baal Madrega. But in his time of Messiah, he referred to the Yetzer Hara as the fire, and he referred to himself as flesh. Now, the Be'er Moshe explains, this tells us that on both ends of the line, the Nisayon was magnified. In terms of the power of the Yetzer Hara, it was more than an ordinary Yetzer Hara, it was fire. And in terms of his vulnerability, he became flesh, he became bistra. He had less resistance than even the normal person. These are the types of nisyonos that sometimes face tzaddikim. These are the types of nisyonos that face the people that have to overcome the nisyonos and in turn pave the way for future generations, to become a symbol of there is no real excuse. Now, Eshes Potiphar, Chazal tell us, attempted to persuade Yosef Atzadik for an entire year. For an entire year, she never appeared to him in the same clothes. The clothes that she wore in the morning, she wouldn't wear in the afternoon. All of this, of course, intensifying the Messiah. The Chidushei Arim explains that it had to be for an entire year because Yosef Atzadik paved the way for the Yidden in Mitzrayim and subsequently to us as well to be able to fight off the Yetzer Hara for every single day of the year, in every set of circumstances. And that is why Yosef Atzadik was faced with the Nisayon from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah. And the Nisayon constantly changed. from morning to afternoon to evening. Because in every single matzah that a Yid is, in every calendar date of the year, there is a changing Messiah. And a Yid knows Yosef Atzadik was there before him and conquered it. To understand the magnitude of the Messiah, the Ber Moshe quotes a fascinating medrash. Yosef said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my father Yaakov had Nisyonis. My grandfather had Nisyonis. I never had any tests. Isn't the Messiah what makes a tzaddik a real tzaddik? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Chayecha, shani menasa oischa yoser mehem. Your test will be greater than theirs. That means that Yosef Atzadik's Messiah was greater than that of even his grandfather, even of Avraham Avinu, which includes the Messiah of diving into the cauldron of fire, which includes the Messiah of the Akedah. And the Moshe Rabbeinu was meramis to that in the bracha, the Shevet Yosef, referring to the sneh that was bayer ke'esh, a fire that kept on burning, and Yosef Atzadik was able to withstand it. Lavas Eish, the flame of fire, is Gematria Es Nesayin Yosef. The Hasneh Einenu Ucha is Gematria Yesoid Tzadik, which is the name for Yosef Atzadik, the midah of Yesoid. Now, what exactly Chazal mean when they say that he saw the mist the Yoitnei Shalaviv? There are many explanations to this. We have to remember, like the Yetzirah always plans things, Yosef Atzadik was faced with a hashkafa question as well. Eishes Potiphar came with her beferish printout from the stars that says that they were supposed to have children together, that Doyos was supposed to come forth from that. Would Yosef Atzadik take it upon his responsibility to eliminate a Shevet in Klal Yisrael? Of course, later on, he would understand what that meant. He would marry Osnaf. Osnaf was Dinah's daughter, but being raised by Potiphar and Eishes Potiphar, so Memela, so it's as if she is their children, and that was the meaning of what the stars were predicting. So Yosef Atzadik could have rationalized his sin, because he didn't know that then. Yet Heroloi demist the Yoitnei Shalaviv. Yaakov Avinu in his lifetime didn't make calculations. His father, who was Mechanech, imbued within him a feeling of, this is wrong. And the Yitzhak will come with 1,000 excuses and explain why it's right, but the bottom line is, you know it's wrong. But the Bnei Shalom Cheshbainis, what's going to be with the Shvatim of Klal Yisrael? Look, when Yaakov Avinu went to Lavan's house, he was no young man. Despite that, he sidestepped for 14 years to learn in yeshiva. What about building Klal Yisrael? How do you take that upon yourself? Being so old, past middle age, and you take up so many years to learn in yeshiva, and you know that all of the Shvatim are dependent on you? Yaakov didn't make these kinds of cheshbonos. He did what was right for the moment, and he said, let HaKadosh Baruch Hu worry about Klal Yisrael. Others explain, Ra de Mus the Yoitnei Shalaviv refers to Yosef Atzadik's attachment to the midah of Tiferet, the beauty of the Shechina Hadgaisha. And in a sense, what it means is there's a mashal that's brought down in the Sefer Reishis Chachma of a young peasant who decided that perhaps the princess would marry him. As much as it didn't make sense, he somehow put on his best overalls and during a parade once pushed himself over and he asked the princess if she would marry him. The princess, laughing at it, said, sure, I'll marry you. Meet me in the cemetery. We'll make the chuppah over there. Of course, she said that to him mockingly. However, this peasant, not being very smart, thought that she was serious. And he was waiting for his chuppah that was going to take place in a cemetery. He came home, he packed all his belongings. He went running to the cemetery, and as he was standing there, really believing the princess was going to come, he was overwhelmed with such ahava, with such passion, that he decided, why waste it on mundane tigers? Maybe there is something that he can truly do with his life. And he ran away from the cemetery. He ran away from the cemetery to turn a whole new leaf in his life. He applied himself to inyanim of chesed, to serve the Rebbeinu Shalom. He began to learn, he began to daven, and he grew up to be an Adam Gada, because he was faced with such an intensified passion that somehow he was able to convert it to reality, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yosef Atzadik was able to take elements of the passion and the drive and always apply it to his avodas Hashem, to lift it to a higher madrega. He couldn't fight it, but he could convert it. But let's put all of this aside for a moment. And let's change the perspective of this shmooze away from Yosef Atzadik. And let's put a little bit of pressure on the father. Chazal tell us, what did Yosef Atzadik see that made him stop? He saw the image of his father. Now, this puts a lot of pressure on fathers, because it means that in the course of the lives of our children, inevitably they're going to be faced with nisyanos, and inevitably they're going to be faced with overwhelming nisyanos, that based on their own kaiches and given their vulnerability, they may not be able to overcome. However, if the father gave the child the right chinuch, if the son saw in his father a mesiras nefesh for Torah and avodah, if the father sat down when he said Shema with the child at night, if he says Shema with the child at night, and would tell him stories about tzaddikim, if the father painted a scene, sat by the Shabbos table with a glow, with zmiras, with love, if he created an image for the son, then later on in his life, the son can draw on the image of that father. Whether the father is physically there or not, what would my father say? What would my father do? And that may be the only thing that is going to give him the courage to overcome. But if the father doesn't set that scene when the child is young, so what does the child have to turn to? Then what image of the father can he see? If the only image the child has of a father is coming home, throwing himself into a recliner with a can of beer, and reading a newspaper at night, that demus diyoitne shalaviv is not going to stop the son from being able to withstand the tidal wave of nisyanos. If between Mincha and Ma'ariv this father rolls to the back of the Medrash and shmuzes, that the Mustayotne Shalaviv is not going to be a driving force or a blockade for the son when he needs one. So the responsibility then falls back to us, to the father. I heard from the very chashuv Yid ones who withstood the difficult Messianis over here in America in a time where Yiddishkeit, where the ruchnius of people were dropping like flies, and there were few who could withstand the unbelievable Messianis of Shmir Shabbos during those difficult periods. And I asked this very chashuv Yid, what held you? He said that in my block there were no yeshivas, as unfortunately the tragedy was in America during those days. And I had Goyish friends and Yiddish friends, and Yiddishkeit was something nice. And my father was a Pashut Yid. But Friday night when I went with him to shul, when we came to the Shamru B'nai Yisrael as Shabbos, when we came to the word, V'asef es Shabbos l'Deirosam for generations, he would always grab my arm and hold it tight. And tears would flow from his eyes, l'Deirosam, Shabbos should stay for generations. As many alien influences that I faced, and despite the tremendous lack of positive influences, when I grew up during those years in America, this scene of my father holding on to me by l'Deirosam overpowered everything else. Long after my father wasn't here, when I faced difficulties with Shmir Shabbos, somehow that image of my father kept me going. I knew I couldn't overstep the line. And as parents, each and every one of us has that responsibility to create an image for the son to fall back on when he closes his eyes during one difficult point in his life. Who knows how many decades later. Chazal tell us an ayin hara has no effect with the children of Yosef, and that is as a reward that Yosef would not allow his eyes to absorb what they weren't supposed to see. Therefore, no evil eye can have any effect. The Gemara tells us anyone who is frightened of an ayin hara should say these words, Ana mezar de Yosef klasina. I come from the children of Yosef, to loishal to the einadisha, to whom an ayin hara has no effect. But the fact is that there are 12 shvatim in Klal Yisrael. Granted, too, Ephraim and Menashe come from Yosef, What about the rest of us? How can we say we are from the children of Yosef? Yes, the Gemara instructs anyone to take advantage of this in order to thwart off the threat of the Nine Hara. The answer is Yosef's Messiah had within it the brunt, the difficulties of all the Nisyonos that Klal Yisrael would face. Anyone, not just children of Yosef per se. Yosef's Messiah was tantamount to the Messiah of all the 600,000 original Neshamis of Klal Yisrael at one time. And Yosef was able to draw chizuk from the others, from the Shoyish of Klal Yisrael. As a result, Yosef's battle against the Eish of the Yetzer Hara paves the way for every Yid, and the Yid who follows that path automatically falls into the category of the children of Yosef. And as a result, concludes the Ben Moshe, is privy to that same shmira, that same protection against an Ayin Hara. In Yosef HaTzadik's dream, he says, "V'hinei anachnu mi'almim alumim," we were binding sheaves b'tay chasada in the middle of the field. "V'hinei kama alumasi," and my sheaf, it arose, v'gam nitzav, and it also stood upright. "V'hinei sisuden alumasechem," and your sheaves came around it, v'atishtachavenu lalumasi, and they bowed down to mine. So if we can take a closer look at the words of the dream over here, there appears to be somewhat of a double lashon. The pasuk says, "V'hinei kama alumasi," my sheaf arose, v'gam nitzava, and it also stood. Well, if it arose, it usually stands. So Rashi explains this. Kama alumasi means niskafa, it stood up. Sometimes things stand up and they fall down right away, especially something as light that blows around in the wind, like a bundle of tuah, like this sheaf. So therefore, Yosef makes a point of explaining what he saw in his dream. He saw, number one, that it stood up, which within itself is somewhat of a miracle, and Zagam Nitzava, that it remained in its place. The Avei Nachal explains this. We say every morning, we quote from the Baraisa, "Elu Dvarim," here are from the things, Sh'adam Oichel Pereseim B'Olam Hazeh, a person eats from the peiros on this world, but the principle remains for the world to come. What are those things? Kibbut Avim, Gimel Chasadim, Shkamas Besemedish, Talmud Torah, and so on. Now, if you're telling me that all he eats is the peiros means the profit, so that automatically explains that he is not consuming the keren, that the principle remains intact. So again, why the double lashon? He eats the peiros, exclusively just the profits of this world, and remember, the keren, the principle, remains. So the Avei Nachal wants us to understand that being rich, even though it's everyone's dream, it's still a tremendous Messiah. And it's not necessarily the best thing for everyone. As a matter of fact, it may necessarily not be the best thing. Being rich can be a sakana. The ram levavecha v'shachachta Hashem alekecha. And sometimes riches can be a reason that a person loses his mitzvahs and masin taivim. His life completely changes. His perspective on things completely change. He is more focused on himself and protecting himself than helping others. It may even cause him to reflect on his earlier life and said, sitting in the Beis HaMedrash like that, looking forward to an extra piece of chicken on Shabbos, how can you compare that to this life? There's a danger that when he tastes his new life, he may even regret his old life. He may even mock at the life that he had until now. What was I until now? A schlepper, a batlin. Now, look at this three-piece suit for $600 that I'm wearing. Of course, he's more interested in others looking at it, rather than he himself looking at it. But the point is, there is a danger here, explains the Avei Nachal. Not only does he stop doing mitzvahs from here and on, but he may regret his previous mitzvahs. Like the Navi says, because of a very defiant kind of attitude, a change in his whole demeanor, in his whole perspective of life. Famous story the Welt says about a Yid who was a big Baal Machnas Orach, although he had very little, but he did whatever he could to take in as many people into his house. Famous Rebbe once came to his house. He asked the Rebbe for a bracha. The Rebbe hesitantly gave him the bracha. The man became very, very rich. His house expanded in all different directions. He took houses down on the entire block and rebuilt it with a huge mansion. He began to furnish it with the most expensive furniture, the most exquisite silver began to adorn the shelves of his house, and of course now he had to worry, and he had to put in expensive burglar alarms and so on, and he even posted a guard, and he put up a sign on his door that Mishalachim are only welcome every second month on the 14th between 8 and 8:20. Eventually, they weren't welcome at all. And he had guards standing by his door to make sure that no one pulls up and sneaks in. When the Rebbe came with his entourage, the guards first didn't want to take them in, but when he happened to notice from his huge, tall windows on the second floor terrace who it was, he came running down and invited the Rebbe in. But the Rebbe wasn't talking much now. He offered the Rebbe a lot of money for tzedakah, but the Rebbe didn't seem to be interested in it. The Rebbe walked over to the huge, big windows and stared outside for a while. The man explained to the Rebbe how these windows were imported from Italy, and the window frames from Switzerland, and how they had a special groove and design in them. The Rebbe didn't seem too impressed. He then walked over to a huge mirror on the other side of the room. And he said, an interessante Sache, my friend. How come when you look out the front windows you see the entire world? So he began to explain, because my house is situated in such a scenic place. And how come when you look in this other glass, all you see is yourself? Oh, that's a mirror. Boy, the Rebbe is really out of it. That's a mirror, Rebbe. But they're both glass, asked the Rebbe. What's the difference between one and the other? How come one offers you an opportunity to see the world and the other just allows you to see yourself? Well, I don't know exactly how mirrors work, but I think you put some grind of silver behind the glass, and that's the effect that it has. Ah, said the Rebbe. A little bit of silver, that all you see is yourself. How fascinating. And with those words, the Rebbe left. But not alone. The man came running after the Rebbe. He had gotten the message. And he began to cry. The Nachal actually explains that there's two kinds of ashirus. There's a shirus that comes mitzad mazel. One of the things the malach decrees is ordered to decree for the baby before the child is born is whether it's going to be rich or poor. And that can be changed with tefillah. But l'maisa, there's an official mazel. And then sometimes a person does the right mitzvah and a Kadosh Baruch Hu gives him a reward, a Kadosh Baruch Hu gives him schar. Zakti Avinach. Generally, the kind of ashirus that sends a person in the wrong direction is a ashirus that comes mitzad his mazel. That was his script to become rich at one point in his life. And like everything else on his script that was b'shet for him, it depends what the person does with it. He can turn it into a mitzvah, he can turn it into an avera. But he's definitely vulnerable. However, explains the Avinach, sometimes it was not necessarily written on his script. It wasn't declared before he was born he was going to be rich, but a person did a certain mitzvah, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave him a certain schar. He becomes wealthy. Zakti Avinach. With this kind of a wealth, we apply the pasuk Birchas Hashem Hitasher, V'lo Yisaysiv Otzev. The blessing of Hashem makes a person wealthy, and it does not increase depression. Yes, depression sometimes comes along with wealth. When a person has too much money on his hands, too much time on his hands, we begin to worry about things and get depressed about things he would never have had time to beforehand. But when the yeshivas comes as a bracha from Hashem, then you avoid all of this. Thus the Mishnah says, continues the Avinach, anyone who fulfills the Torah through poverty, the end is he's going to fulfill the Torah being rich. Now, if you look around you, asks the Avinach, there are many tzaddikim who indeed were mekayim the Torah me'oini. They didn't necessarily win the lottery or hit on the right stock. Furthermore, the lashon should have been the end is he's going to be rich. How do you explain this expression, soifoi l'kaimoi mei oisher? What does l'kaimoi mei oisher mean? But the Avinach, the Tana is not necessarily saying that a person who was mekayim the Torah in poverty is going to be rich. Rather, the Tana is saying, one who fulfills the Torah even though he's poor. As a result, the Torah saves him from chait. And if he does the right things, where for his particular situation, the Kadosh Baruch Hu says, as a result of your mitzvahs, you are not going to be blessed with ashirus. That particular ashirus, that wealth that comes as a result of the schar of his mitzvahs,
that is not going to lead to bittul Torah, that is not going to lead to chait, that is not going to lead to his downfall. That's what Sefer L'Kaim and Veyashev means. If he's going to become rich as a result of his Messiah, serving Hashem through poverty, if that is his particular char, not everyone's char is the same, but one thing you can be rest assured, if his ashirus comes as a char, it'll be a ashirus that leads to blessing, only to blessing. But the Tana also says, "Hamavatl Torah meyashev," someone who is mevatl Torah being rich, soifei levatla me'oini. That does not necessarily mean that any rich person who doesn't learn is going to become poor. It means that if a person's particular einish for not handling his riches right is becoming poor, that poorness, that poverty, doesn't necessarily have all of the blessings that other poverty has. Poverty does have blessings. It breaks a person's heart. It makes him much closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It simplifies life to a certain degree. It makes him more realistic. He doesn't live in a balloon of affluence. However, if that is the result of his poverty, it's not necessarily a klol. In the final analysis, it is a great blessing. He just may be a better person for it. What the Mishnah is saying is, if someone is mevatl Torah me'oisher, he uses his riches in the wrong way, and as a result he becomes poor, you don't necessarily have a guarantee even that he has the milas of being poor. So if he'll continue to be mevatl Torah even being poor. And that is the meaning of the Mishnah says, you eat from the fruits down here in this world, if you do the right thing, and as a result you're zeicha to ashirus, so you will reap the benefits of that ashirus, and if the ashirus is a real bracha, if you handle it as a real bracha, it doesn't act to use up your reward. On the contrary, it enhances your reward. It's possible for a person to reap the pay rise of riches down here in this world, and by the same token, it doesn't use up a single source. Why? Because he handles the riches right, the way a Yid is supposed to. He understands it's no reason for him to think he's better than someone else. On the contrary, it's a reason for him to think he is now more responsible for Klal Yisrael than others are, because he has the means to help. So Yosef Tzaddik describes to his brother the dream, how he's going to become a melech and powerful. But to the brothers, it's not necessarily a blessing if you'll become a king. There are many kings that regretted the day they wanted to become a king. That was their downfall. They wanted power and glory, and all they really got was 1,000 jealous eyes and assassination attempts. But in a more ruchnistic sense, becoming a king to the Shvatim wasn't something that made their mouth water. It wasn't something they necessarily looked up to. So Yosef HaTzadik had to clarify something. He said, I see in my dream that I'm going to become rich and powerful. Kama arumasi, my sheaves are going to stand up, but the gam nitzava, they're going to remain standing. In other words, as a result of my power and wealth, I won't become empty. As a result of my power and wealth, I will become an even greater tzaddik, because I will use this power and wealth to help Klal Yisrael, to help the world. And therefore my malchus will last forever. And here, he raised the eyebrows of the Shvatim. Here is where they got upset. That you'll become a king is one thing, but you're so absolutely certain that your becoming a king is going to be only a source of bracha that's going to last forever? How can you say that? Who's immune? Who is not vulnerable when they receive power and wealth? The Rabbi Nachal explained, he also took issue with his suggestion that his malchus would last forever. How is that going to fall into place with malchus of Mashiach that comes from Yehuda? That's the ultimate malchus. In other words, we agree that for a temporary time, perhaps you are going to be melech, but you seem to be identifying too much with this malchus that is headed in your direction. Now the Beis Halevi points out that when Yosef told the first dream to his brothers about the sheaves, about the bundles of Torah, they didn't like it. That didn't do much to help their relationship. But at this point you do not have the lashon of kina, the lashon of jealousy. When he told them the second dream about the star and the moon and everyone bowing to him, here it says that his brothers were jealous. So it seems that the first dream resulted in sinna, in some degree of hate, whatever that means over here. And the second dream resulted in kinna, in jealousy. The Beis Halevi explains basically what we just did from the Yavinach. The first dream, that was economics. It was about tfuah, it was about produce, it was about agriculture. She's bundles of tfuah. They would have to bow down to him. They would have to come and ask him for parnasa. This didn't really touch off any jealousy. As the Beis Halevi explains, one person being more rich than the other doesn't make him a better person than the other. In his atzmius, he's the same person. Perhaps my bank account can be embarrassed for his bank account. Perhaps my wallet can be embarrassed when you compare it to his wallet. But I don't have to be embarrassed from him. We're both the same human beings. Elamai, why was there a degree of sin over here? So the Yavinach will explain. Not jealousy, but sinna in the sense they thought Yosef was a little bit too confident in himself. That he'll become melech, that he'll become rich and powerful, no mehechataisa. But you're so sure you're not vulnerable? That malchus is going to last forever? That riches is going to be only a bracha? What guarantee does a person have until he's actually tested? When it came to the second dream, and here Yosef Tzaddik is talking about stars and the moon, and he's in the center. This is a whole different issue. Now he was suggesting he was the Tzaddik Yisrael Olam, and as the Beis Halevi explains it, the 12 Mazolos, they all evolve about him. Here he's talking spirituality, here he's talking ruchnius. Here he's saying that even when it comes to Torah and Tefillah, he's going to be the mashbiah, he's going to be the rich one. Here's the first time the Torah introduces the term that they were jealous, vayukanu. And the truth is, this was jealousy with a license. Kinna safim ta'bachachma. The one thing you are allowed to be jealous on is someone else's spiritual greatness. Only, of course, if you put it in the proper context, that as a result of this jealousy, you will attempt to emulate him by working as hard as he is. But take note, says the Beis Halevi, in the second dream, there was no sin, there was no hatred, there was nothing to hate him here for. And then the Beis Halevi says a fascinating part. You know, the way you interpret a dream, that's how the dream is going to manifest itself. So you have to be careful to whom you tell your dream. And it says indeed if a person has a rather frightening dream, he says Tillim, he does a Tavach Cholim, he gives tzedakah, but the Shlar Kaddish says don't say it out, don't verbalize it. Don't be mighty at mikayach alapayah. So the Beis Halevi says a murder of art. When the Shvatim heard the dream about the sheaves, what was their response? But Yomer Lu'echav, his brother, said to him, what? And these were the first words that they said after they heard the dream. Hamalech timlech aleinu? You're going to be king over us? In mashal timshal banu? And right away they said, what did we do? We just verbalized it that he's going to be king. Now the dream is going to come true. So they were even more frustrated. Look what we just did. We were Makayim b'cholam. So then he tells them the second dream. That he had another dream, that Hashem is so this time they say, we're not going to say a thing. Because if we say it, we're going to be mighty at Mikayach Lapayel. Instead, they take him to their father. And what does their father say? The father screams at him and he says, so according to you, me and your mother and your brothers were all going to come and bow down to you? And the brothers looked at each other and said, now our father said it. Now he was mighty at Mikayach Lapayel. Again, the dream is going to manifest itself. So they realized whatever they were going to do over here, there was no way around it. But Yekanu Bayachav, whatever was happening over here, whether they liked it or not, whether they thought it was the right thing or not, it was going to happen. A marshal was brought down about a butcher who planned to shecht a certain cow. The cow, however, was not particularly happy about the idea. And therefore, as much as he tried to get the cow into the shlachtais, into the slaughterhouse, he couldn't. All means of persuasion proved futile. They began to pull it by its neck. The cow stubbornly stood still, would not budge. Then, the shaykhah and the butcher had a bright idea. They ran to the stable, released the calf, and led it to the shlachtais. As soon as the cow saw her young calf walk in that direction, she obediently trotted behind. The cow knew she was going to the shlachtais. She still could not resist the emotional drive not to follow its young. Were it not for Yosef's presence in Mitzrayim, Yaakov would never have left Eretz Yisrael to settle there. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu guided events in such a manner. Yosef had to be brought to Mitzrayim in order to draw Yaakov and his family there too. Which of course answers the question. Knowing as he did that the brothers were hostile towards Yosef, how could Yaakov send him there by himself? If there was anyone who was an expert at assessing someone else's nature and predicting what that person was going to do, it was Yaakov Avinu. No one else had survived the symbol of thievery. No one else was able to endure the very being that personified treachery and lie, love and harami all these years other than Yaakov Avinu. And there was definitely no one else who was able to outsmart him. No one else was able to figure out exactly how to avoid Esau's wrath and his anger. When it came to understanding human relations, when it came to predicting what a person was going to do and what to do to avoid the confrontation and not to be hurt, no one was a greater expert than Yaakov Avinu. He dealt with the worst of the worst and was able to out-predict it, to sidestep their hostility. And here, in such a seemingly obvious situation, Yaakov Avinu sends Yosef to his brothers that he knows are so hostile to him. Why? How do we explain this? And the answer is simple. HaKadosh Baruch Hu put the idea into Yaakov's heart because it was his plan that Yosef should be sent to Mitzrayim, followed by Yaakov's family, because the Gzeil of Golus Mitzrayim had to be carried out. And if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants something to happen, so you can have the greatest expert, the smartest person in the world in his very field of expertise that is going to do exactly the opposite of what anyone could predict. And if we all take a thorough look at the mistakes in our lives, so then we can divide them into two categories. Sometimes we make mistakes because we're lazy, we were nogeya b'davar, we have certain taivas and temptations. So that's an issue of Bechira and Yetzer Hara. Yet sometimes we sit down and we try to calculate things, and we honestly try to be as sincere with ourselves as possible. We try to take the necessary precautions, and then, after having prepared all of this in our minds, we go out and we do exactly the opposite of what has to be done. And we do it to ourselves. And we wonder why. Sometimes the answer is negligence. Sometimes the answer is we should have asked counsel and advice. But sometimes the answer is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to happen. And therefore all of your chachma and all of your eitzes and all of your counsel was for naught. Ein chachma, v'ein eitzah, v'ein tuna neged Hashem. The Medrash doesn't say he was overconfident. The Medrash doesn't say he didn't think things out. The Medrash just says Hashem implanted the idea in Yaakov's heart because there had to be a golus. And Yaakov himself, who should have known better, was the one who would start that golus by sending Yosef. So here we come to a very important issue. And that is defining a term that on the one hand is perhaps the most fundamental yesod in our emunah, and by the same token can be used as an excuse to shirk responsibility and for one to assume that he's not accountable for his actions. And that is the all-famous term, Nu Segevein Bashert. Segevein Bashert means that nothing happens in this world unless the HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to happen. Emes. But there's a positive way of applying this term and a negative way of applying the term. The positive way of applying the term is, I am responsible to do whatever I can to try to be the best person that I am. And Memela, after having done it, if it doesn't work, and the negative way of applying the term is, what's the point of even trying? Whatever's supposed to happen is going to happen anyway. Now, what he's saying is true. Whatever is supposed to happen is going to happen anyway. But his attitude is wrong. It's dangerously wrong. If you slap someone across the face, so it was b'shet for that person to get slapped across the face. But that in no degree diminishes the terrible ramifications of slapping another yid across the face. The slapper is still a rasha. The slapper is still going to be punished unless he asks mechila and makes amends for his actions. Now, there are those who would argue that if a person engages in hate, that's not b'shet at all. That's clear. You decided to sin. The Tzaddik explains in his Svarim that it's not true. Even what a Baal Bechira does, and even when he elects to sin, it was also b'shet for it to happen. But don't make the dangerous mistake of saying that that somehow in any way diminishes your accountability. You may ask, there's a contradiction over here. if it had to happen anyway, so why should the person be accountable? So that's the general question of how Bechira and Yediyah work together. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, how does that work with a person's free choice of either sinning or not sinning? So whatever the teretz is on that kasha applies to this as well. Whether we understand it or not is irrelevant. But the bottom line is, it's not a sira. It's bashert, but you are still going to have to live up to the examination of what did you do to avoid it. And ultimately, it's all going to boil down to if I tried my best, then there is tremendous nacham over here, tremendous consolement in sigavim bashert. But if someone leaves a banana peel at the top of the stairs and someone else falls, yes, it was just yes. But that has no bearing whatsoever on the taina. Why did you leave a banana peel there? You still have to ask the same mechila. You still have to pay for the same damages. It makes no difference that it was bashert. That's not your concern. That's the Rabbeinu Shalom's puzzle. And it would appear that no one makes this clearer than the Ramban this week said. Yosef HaTzadik was given the mission by Yaakov Avinu, find your brother, and let's see how they're doing. Yosef knew he would encounter difficulties, and he did encounter difficulties. And strange things happened to Yosef HaTzadik. The Medrash tells us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent 3 malachim to assist Yosef. One to save him from death at his brother's hands, because as much as they tried to kill him, Lamaisa, they didn't. Another to guard him in the pit. And a third to accompany him in Mitzrayim. So in Yosef's most crucial moment of his life, in his most difficult moment of his life, Lamaisa, there were malachim there protecting him. And this within itself is an important insight, that even during a person's most difficult crisis, we don't see the malachim that are there measuring ounce for ounce exactly what we have to endure and what we're being protected from. Chazal tell us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made things easier for Yosef. The Arabs who purchased him will usually carry oil or different things that may have an offensive odor, happen to be carrying sweet-smelling psalmim. So there's the famous word from Chaim Shmulevitz. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu was protecting Yosef. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was allowing for his brothers to sell him as a slave, to be ripped away from his father, to be thrown to Mitzrayim for years and years of sheer torture, and you're telling me HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kind to Yosef, HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects Tzadikim. After all, he smells nice perfume instead of oil. Isn't it frivolous to suggest this is called protecting under those circumstances? So there's the famous word from the Mir Mishgiach. The point isn't that Yosef had something nice to smell. The fact that Yosef at least was shown that it would be a pleasant environment in terms of what he was absorbing, and normally this was not the case. Normally they would carry different kinds of merchandise. This showed Yosef HaTzadik that the whole episode, as difficult as it was, and as troubling as it was, and as traumatic as it was for him, Lamaisa was all hashgacha. This was not a free-falling situation. What he has to go through, he has to go through. The difficulties that he has to encounter, that's the reason that we're down here. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu was sending a message to Yosef HaTzadik. You should know that you are not going to suffer 1 ounce more than what you're supposed to. You have to go through this difficult process. You have to be sold. You have to be ripped away from your father. But you don't have to smell things that are uncomfortable for you, and therefore, you're not. So getting back to what we're saying. Yosef HaTzadik realizes that something is terribly wrong. That this seemingly simple mission of going to check out his brothers is developing into something extremely complicated. First of all, he's lost. V'nei soya basada. Now, the Dasa Keni Balitaisis indicates that the term Toya reflects all the different Golusim of Klal Yisrael. The Taf is the 400 years of Golus Mitzrayim. The Ayin is the 70 years of Golus Babel. The Hay represents the Golus Edom, which cannot last longer than after the complete 5,000 years. In other words, up until 6,000. So Yosef saw that there were dark clouds hovering above him. He knew there was trouble. And he meets the Malach Gabriel. And this man asks him, what are you looking for? And Yosef, at this point, as the Ramban explains, is not frightened. He does not turn around. He says, look, I have to continue on. Maybe he should have entertained the idea of turning back, but he said, no, my father sent me. I have to keep on going despite the difficulties. So he took a deep breath and said, I'm frightened, I'm scared, something is wrong, but It's Achai Enochi Mevakesh. I'm looking for my brother. My father sent me. I have to continue on. Hagidin Ali, tell me, Eifahim Rayim. But Yemer Ish, the person says, Nasum is that they have traveled from here. He was being meramis to him. You call them your brothers. They have traveled away from brotherhood. You should know they're planning to kill you. Nelcha Zaysana. They're plotting all sorts of evil schemes against you. So whether Yosef understood the direct message or he understood the tone, Lamaisa, that was another reason for him to turn around, but he made a decision to continue on. His father had sent him, he had to continue going. Vayelech Yosef acharecha. Zakter Ramban, there are two major factors we have to look at over here. Number one, despite the frightening amens, despite the forecast that didn't seem good, Yosef made a decision to continue on because his father told him to do so. Furthermore, says the Ramban, this also teaches us that in the final analysis you can take the smartest people in the world and put them into a situation. And yes, they are obligated, we are obligated to think things through, to do the right thing regardless of how difficult it is, to attempt to make the best decisions possible, but ultimately no. Ki ha'gzeira emes, v'ha'charitzos sheker, says the Ramban. The gzeira of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is emes, it is the only thing that is going to be sustained, and all other cheshbonais are sheker. The emes is Yosef was lost. He could have returned to his father saying, I don't know where they are. Sorry. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu prepared for Yosef a moira derech to direct him, there's where they are. I'm warning you, but if you insist on going, I will point in their direction. So there's interessant lashon over here in the Ramban. He says that's why Chazal stressed the point that these were all malachim. It's not for nothing that the Torah tells us this whole story that he was lost and someone gave him directions. So BNS, at first glance, this Ramban is very difficult to understand. On the one hand, he stresses that Yosef made a conscious decision that despite the dangers I will continue on because my father sent me to do it. And on the other hand, the Ramban stresses that whatever conscious decisions he may have made would be irrelevant anyhow because the Gzeir is emes v'charitzu sheker. But if you take a second look at the Ramban, then perhaps we can understand that the Ramban is clearly spelling out what we had suggested at the beginning of the Shir, and that is, don't confuse the two. A Yid has to have two sides of his paper. On one side, he has to 100% believe b'amunah shalema, that whatever happened, whatever is happening, whatever is going to happen is bashet. Nothing will take place unless it is the Ritzayin HaBoyrei, and there is nothing you can do to change it. And on the second side of the sheet, it has to say, this is your achrayus, this is your responsibility, and if you don't do your best to be machanech your children, if you don't do your best to protect your children, if you don't do your best to protect yourself, if you don't do whatever is within your power to make things better for yourself, then ultimate responsibility is yours. In this particular case, Yosef had a decision to make. He was frightened, he was lost, he was concerned, he had signals that things weren't well with his brothers in terms of their relationship with him. He made a conscious decision that in Yosef's eyes was the best possible decision at that time, and that is, I will proceed with Mesiras Nefesh because my father sent me. At the end it was a terrible mistake, but Yosef didn't feel bad. Hagzeir emes v'charitzu sheker, ki asas Hashem yisakim. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. Now it's interesting, there's a Gemara in Masechtas Chulin that some Sefer points out that different Amirayim use different simonim to indicate whether or not they should proceed on a certain mission. For example, Rav, if he had to go someplace, would come to the ferry port, and if the ferry was there ready to take him, he would go. If not, if he just missed the boat, he viewed that as a sign that Shemayim should return to the Beis HaMedrash. Shmuel would be Baidik B'Sefer, the Gemara says in Chulin, Daf Tzadik Hey in the day. Depending on what he learned that day, he would assess the situation and say, it's mashma from these halachas that I'm supposed to do this or I'm not supposed to do that. Rabbi Yochanan would be Baidik B'Tinuk HaYotzei Beis HaSefer. If a child would come out of the cheder, he would say, tell me, my child, what pasuk did you learn today? And on the basis of the message of Yosef heard of that pasuk, he would go on with the day. Now, the Gemara over there, the Mefarshim already deal with the fact that there's a lav in the Torah of Leisenachshu. A person is not allowed to say that if a black cat crosses my path, I'm going to turn around and not proceed, and so on. Why is that different than what these Amirayim did? We're not going to go into that now. There's a difference that is clearly defined over there. But Lamaisa, whatever the case may be, these three Amirayim used these methods to determine what they were going to do, at least for that particular day. Rav would look to see whether the ship was there. Shmuel would look to understand, what did I learn today? What is the signal in this taisus? He may have been learning Shash Nagachas Apara, but Shmuel would be able to feel from what he learned whether or not he should go to a certain place. It didn't make a difference. And Rabbi Yechon would ask a child a pasuk. You know something, said L'cham Sefer? In a sense, all of these things happened to Yosef Atzadik. Missing the boat, apparently Yosef had some trouble over here with his directions. He was lost. In terms of what he had previously learned, Yaakov Avinu had taught him the parsha of Eglah Rufa, which is the parsha about someone who gets into trouble traveling between one city and the other. And as far as listening to a pasuk, so the Malach said to him, Yosef heard the message, but Yomer Ish Nasu Mizeh, I mean, this is the pasuk, Yosef was living it. Yosef knew how to teach the pasuk the way Rashi teaches it for us, to see you Atzman and Achva, the brothers have left your brotherhood, they are gone. So all three indications, whether it was by Rav's standard or whether you make the boat or not, Shmuel, who was Baidik the Sefer, Rabbi Yosef, who asked a child for a pasuk, all three would have indicated for Yosef to turn around and go home. Yosef made his best decision that despite that he would go on, it was a mistake, and Yosef accepted it for what it was. Had Yosef acted on his own interest over here, the fact that it was Basher may have not been all that of a consolement to him. But, and again, this is what the Ramban seems to be spelling out clearly, because ultimately Yosef Atzadik can say to himself, my decision was to endure anything for the honor of my father, therefore I am not going to cry over the fact that I missed all of those blazing warning signals and misread them. Because ultimately, as the Ramban says, Hagazera emes v'acharitzos sheker, in other words, this is out. Basher. At the beginning of the summer of Tafresh Ayin Daled, a Talmud joined the yeshiva of Makov. It was a young man, his name was Yitzchak Krakowiski. As was common in the European yeshivas, they didn't refer to people by their actual last name, but they referred to them by the place that they came from. So he was known as Rav Yitzchak Atavartzka. Yitzchak was much younger than the rest of the yeshiva. He was only 16 years old. But that didn't prevent the people from recognizing him as having, from the most maturest minds in the yeshiva. He was an Ilui Asim, extremely sharp. He had a tremendous bekiyas. He was comfortable throughout Shas and Paiskim. So the yeshiva would start a shir, and Yitzchak would always be able to finish it, even before the yeshiva was 25% through it. It was something that made life difficult for the Rosh Yeshiva, but they couldn't help but being amazed how quickly this young man chaps what you begin to say. You don't have to end anything. If not for the other Bachrim in the yeshiva besides for Yitzchak, the Rosh Yeshiva wouldn't have had much of a shir. Yitzchak also was a very handsome young man. Tall, dark, and handsome, had a kind of dashing appearance that made you stop and look around at him. World War I broke out, and many of the parents came running to bring their children home. Amongst them was Yitzchak's father. The entire yeshiva went to look and see, who is this Yitzchak's father? They could only imagine what he looks like. They were quite taken aback when they saw him. He was almost a midget compared to Yitzchak's tall frame. He seemed terribly hunched back and bent over compared to Yitzchak's straight demeanor. His face seemed almost contorted and ugly compared to his Yitzchak's almost majestic face. And everyone had to blink twice and do a second take. Could it be that this man is actually Yitzchak's father? But Yitzchak himself always had the knack of figuring out the questions people meant to ask before they asked it. Tell the people, with my father's reshus, I know what you are wondering about, and I'll tell you exactly how I am my father's son. Apparently, they were Einiklach from Rav Mordechai Yaffe, the Baal Halavushim. He wrote a series of halachic svarim. The Mishnah Berurah quotes him all the time. He's considered one of the great paiskim, also a great mekubal. His svarim are all named beginning with the word levush, levush malchus, levush tchelis. And there is an accepted story amongst Klal Yisrael why that is so. The Mordechai Yaffe himself was a very dashing, handsome person. Perhaps that's why he got the name Yaffe, or Yud Say Hey, which means nice. And he once ran into a very, very difficult Nisayan, similar to the Nisayan of Yosef Atzadik in this week's Seder. Ramat Chayafi was locked in a room without getting into the details of the story, and a certain princess was toveya him with varavera. Ramat Chayafi saw no way out. The windows were locked. Then he realized that there was a kind of sewer pipe with raw sewage that would lead him outside. Ramat Chayafi did not think twice, and although he was wearing very chashava and expensive begadim, he crawled through it. He would never be able to use those begadim again. However, his neshama remained 100% clean because of his mesirus nefesh. So Ramat Chayafi made a conscious decision on the trade-off over here. His clothes for his neshama. My father told me the story that afterwards, when he opened up a sefer, as much as he was a masmid and a great Talmud Chacham until then, he felt mamish that the Shari Shemayim opened up before him. He was able to see things in Torah that he could not see until then. Clearly, the Or HaGanis had revealed itself for him in the Chutz of his Messiah. Now, he had worn 10 layers of clothing then. He had very expensive robes and different layers of jackets or vests. All of that, of course, had to have been discarded. You couldn't have even been in the same room with it. And he felt that that's why he was able to write 10 svarim. And indeed, he called each sefer Levush. Levush Malchus, Levush Tchelis, and so on. However, here's another part to the story, which perhaps is not so famous. Ramat Chayafi picked up his hands to Shemayim and he made a bakasha. He said he begged that for the next 10 generations, his children, his offspring, should not be in a position of a Nisayan. And although his whole family had this very majestic kind of kingly demeanor that attracted everyone to them, he begged them that at least for the next 10 generations, physically, his family should not be attractive, so that they should not have to be faced with this Nisayan. They should not have to go to such extremes to avoid the Shari Gehenna. Itzikel said, I once sat down and discussed this with my father, and I made a cheshbon. My father is the 10th generation. I am the 11th. While in the genes of Ramat Chayafi's children rested the blueprints of handsome, powerful, dashing-looking people, the tefillos of Ramat Chayafi overrided that for 10 generations. That explained why Itzikel's father looked the way he did, and Itzikel, being the 11th generation, reverted back to what they naturally were supposed to look like. We can understand this story perhaps even better based on a beautiful mahalach that the Nesiv Shalom brings from one of the earlier Slonim Rebbes. A shalsheles is a very rare trop. Shalsheles looks like a little chain, and it's where the Balkaira goes up and up and up and up. Shalsheleses don't come too often. However, in the last couple of Parshiyos, we were frequented by shalshelesen in almost each kriya. The first time we encountered a shalsheles was when Lot hesitated to leave Sidon. On the word vayismama, there is a shalsheles. Vayismama. The next time is in this week's parsha on the word vayimayin, when Yosef Atzadik said, despite all of Eshes Potifar's pleas, and dismissing even all of her flum arguments, so to speak, about how she saw in the stars they were supposed to have Shvatim together, Yosef Atzadik said, no, he refused. And again the Shalsheles, Vayimayin, he refused, Vayimayin. And later on there's a Shalsheles on the word Vayishchat in regard to Shecht and Karbanis. Now, if these three words have identical tropes, there must be some connection. And the connection focuses around the center word, Vayimayin. When the Yetzer Hara comes and he tries to entice someone or put someone in a situation where he faces a difficult sign and he has to go against the wave. So the Torah is giving us over here the 3 steps. The first is Vayismama. The first is don't jump into it the way the Yetzer Hara would like. Push it off. Hesitate. There's a pasuk in Tehillim in regard to the Rasha, Oid ma'at ve'einenu. Chazal say, Oid me'at. Sometimes the way to deal with the Yetzer Hara and a pressing the sign is, look, I'm not saying no, but not right now. Let me just push it off. And then ve'einenu. Sometimes when you push it off and you get over the hurdle, then you have the Siyata D'Shmaya to dismiss it entirely. So the initial reaction to the Yetzer Hara, who comes and tries to entice us, who comes and tries to convince us, engage in this temptation, It's a mitzvah. Vayismam. Push it off. Hesitate. And afterwards, when you get your bearings, vayimayim. Then make a firm decision. No. Vayimayim with a shalshelis. Not just no, 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 no. Yosef HaTzadik, so young, so vulnerable, so alone, is overwhelmed over here by Yeshes Beitifa. And she comes to him with all of these cheshbainos and all of these threats. And Yosef HaTzadik was no fool. He knew very well that if he goes running out, what the rest of the story is going to be, that she would accuse him, that he would wind up in prison. He could have argued, what about the Chil Hashem? If this story gets out, if people are going to believe her, he'll wind up in prison. He'll have no way of defending himself against her accusations. And then she came with Fruma Cheshbainis. She sees in the stars that they're supposed to build Klal Yisrael together. Of course, what she really saw was that Yosef HaTzadik would eventually marry Asnath. Asnath was Dina's daughter, raised by her, and raising Chazal say, one who is Megadel, a child, the day says, Ki'ilu Yaldoi. But Yosef HaTzadik didn't know all of this. He knew he was alone, he knew he was in trouble, he knew he was in a strange land, and he knew the ramifications of should he avoid this Nisayan. Yet it was a Nisayan nonetheless. So his initial reaction was to push it off. And then finally, when he was standing on firmer ground, he made a firm decision. Vayemo'en. No, no, no. That's the Shalshelis. Emphasizing it again and again and again. Yetzirah, you won't give me Fruma Cheshbainis. Taiva, you won't overwhelm me with temptation. My answer is no. And from there, we go on to the next step. We find the Shalshelis on the word Vayishchat. If you are Zaycha to push off, and then you are Zaycha to refrain, then eventually you will be Zaycha to shecht the Yetzirah completely. And you become totally free of his snaring entanglements. But he's Moisef here afterward. The Nesiva Shalom is from another one of the Slanim Erebus that we really had another Shalshelis recently, and that was in Pashas Chayesar, by the Tefillah of Eliezer. And that was in Kapitel Chav Daled Pasuk Yud Beis, Vayoymar Hashem Elokei Adoni Avram Hakrina Lefani Hayom V'Aseh Chesedim Adoni Avram. The Shalshelis in the word Vayoymar fits into the puzzle as well, he explains. If you are Makayin de Vayismama, push the Yetzirah off, and that leads you to Vayemoyin, to refrain, and then to Shech the Yetzirah, you are Zaycha to Vayayma. You are Zaycha to an ability to be Mispalel. Your mouth is opened to Torah and Tefillah in a way that you have never experienced before. When the Ger came to Hillel, and the Ger said, teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot, so Hillel told the Ger, let me tell you this one rule. Koma desani Allah, anything that is something you wouldn't do to yourself that is hated to you, l'chavach l'sada, don't do to a friend. Koma desani Allah, l'chavrech, the Nesiva Shalom says is the lashon of his chabra, the lashon of connection. Anything that you feel is mafriya and mazik your relationship with the Kadosh Baruch. Sometimes a person is in a matzah of Nisayan, and the most difficult Nisayan is, the most difficult aspect of being tested is not always knowing what is right and what is wrong. So stop and think. I see all the reasons to do it, I see all the reasons not to do it. Ultimately, after having engaged in this act, will I be closer to the Rabbeinu Shalom or be distanced from him? If you feel that there's going to be less of a hischabrus between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then don't do it. That's how the Kajin Tzemagad explains this. Kol madesani Allah l'chavrech lo'isavit. You're confused about this. Is it right or is it wrong? Try to separate yourself from the massive enough to sort of get a bird's eye view and say, when this is all done, will I be closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Will my relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu be closer, be more mechuber, or more detached? If you feel that it'll affect your relationship, don't do it. And this, Hillel says, is the klal for the entire Torah. For every single mitzvah say and every single mitzvah life to say. Every person is faced with this kind of an asay in one way or another. Yosef HaTzadik was very confused. He was very alone. He had an unbelievable asay, unimaginable. Yet he looked at all of this confusion and he had one answer. How is this going to affect my relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu? And that explains the Nesiva Shalom is the Shalshelis on top of the word Vayemoyin. Shalshelis means a chain. He looked at the chain that links him between HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he says, taking into account all of the Fruma Cheshbainis. Yes, she sees in the stars, I'm supposed to have Shvatim with her, the Chil Hashem that's going to be, if I say no, and she's going to accuse me of all sorts of things. The bottom line is this going to make that chain that connects me to HaKadosh Baruch Hu tighter and firmer, or am I going to be detached from it? Yosef could not fool himself. By allowing himself to go into the taiva, he would be distancing himself from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not coming closer, and therefore his decision was no, and no at all costs. Let's go back to the story with the Lavush for a moment. He pushes off the Nesayim, Vayismama. He's alone for a moment in that room. He manages to think of an excuse. Although, Al Pi Derech HaTeva, there's no way out anyway, first let me push it off. Once he pushed it off, he looked for a possible means of exit, although, Al Pi Pashtus, there was no way out. Because when you look hard enough, sometimes you find it. And he found one. A very, very difficult tunnel to crawl through. A tunnel full of raw sewage. He proceeds to the next step, by Yemoyim. Should I go through this or not? I have to say no at all costs, and this is the only way to say no. And therefore, at all costs, wearing the most beautiful clothes in the world, 10 layers of it, he dives through it and tunnels through it. Tunnels through the human waste to be able to free himself from the Yetzer Hara. And then he doesn't stop there. Vayishchat. He is mispal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to undo the reasons that created the taiva to start with. He is mispal that no longer should his challenging figure bring him more tzaros in terms of the Yetzer Hara. He wants all of his children for the next 10 generations, 10 perhaps corresponding to the 10 layers of clothing, not to have this Nesayim. He wants the Yetzer Hara schacter. He is not looking for more challenges. And what is he zeicha to? He's zeicha to vayayma. He's zeicha to limit HaTorah. He is zeicha to an ability to be able to write halachos and explain the most difficult concepts in Torah in a way that is so sweet you can mamish feel the reich of Gan Eden that was behind this mechaber, behind this tzaddik. Vayomer, an ability to speak, an ability to open up, an ability to daven, an ability to learn, all because he followed the process. He was zeicha to the Or Haganis, to the hidden light, the light of Ruach HaKodesh that is in Torah. The light of Chazal say comes out in the Chanukah Lecht. And the reason we are zeicha to that Or Haganis in the Chanukah Lecht is also because of Mesiras Nefesh. Yehudis didn't have to risk her life. The general wanted to marry her. She could have been the princess. She could have been a queen in Greece. The Chashmeinoim were not threatened with their lives. They were only threatened with their neshamas. The Chashmeinoim could have given in to the Greeks. The Greeks weren't the Germans. They didn't say, because you're Jewish, we want you dead. Adarabah. The Greeks said, all we want is for you to align yourself with us morally. Enjoy our gymnasium. Serve our God. This way you can stoop to new, low moral standards, and you don't even have to have a guilty conscience. The Chashmeinaim physically had the option of going along with that. They didn't have to risk their lives. They did. And that's why they were zeicha to the Or Haganis. The same way the Lavush was zeicha that the Shari Chachma should open up before him. The same way Yosef HaTzadik was zeicha to Malchus. The same way you and I and everyone else is zeicha to new hashpais of understandings and new gateways of wisdom if we wind up on the right side of an Nesayim, and that is Mesiras Nefesh. And make no mistake, Mesiras Nefesh does not mean jumping into fire. Mesiras Nefesh is not just leading a battalion against a Greek army. Mesiras Nefesh means breaking your will, whether it's holding back on a line you would like to tell a family member, whether it's toning down the way we dress. But his Paseu Bevigdoi, she grabbed onto his cloak. Chazal stressed this. Yosef HaTzadik's lavish dress, for whatever reason that tzaddik had to dress that way, but that's what made him vulnerable. Waking up a half hour earlier, redefining our lifestyle in a way that only you and I know, because we all have our own Nesyainais, but going against our Ratzon, even if it's not the ultimate Mesiras Nefesh, it's still Mesiras Nefesh, and it still opens up our Haganis. It opens up the hidden light. The hidden light that Tzadikim are zeicha to see in the Chanukah Lecht, and the hidden light that projects from each and every one of our Chanukah Lecht, whether we actually see it or not.
This shiur is distributed by Kolodas, 11 Steichenet Street, Yerushalayim. For donations, please call 02-5383-999. Fax 02-538-0267. Postbox 57035.